Welcome, Irish fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. My nombre is Vince DeDario, and with me, as always, is my compadre. That's Bryan Driskell. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com.
Have you been helping one of your kids with their Spanish homework lately or something?
Hey, I'm back in the building. I'm back at school, and I'm feeling the education just all around me. That's really what it is. And that's next semester, by the way, which I'm really not looking forward to because I know he's going to ask me for help. But anyway, so today this is going to be a fun one. I have been looking forward to this podcast for a while. You and I are going to give out our 2020 Irish Breakdown Season Awards. And we put together a list, some categories, and that was it. You gave me the list. We didn't talk about the list. We didn't talk about what the definition of each category is. Like, what's the definition of clutch? So we could
take it however we wanted to go with it.
Exactly.
We actually didn't, just for full disclosure, we didn't tell each other the picks until literally 60 seconds before we hit record.
Correct. And I'm excited about the conversation we're about to have on some of these because I don't know. You know what I picked. I don't really know what you picked on some of them. So this is going to be fun. I still think we need to come up with a name for these awards. Like, are they like, you got the SBs? Are these the IBs?
Yeah. You know what I think I'm going to do? I think next year when you do this, I'm going to pick some some Irish Breakdowns, like longtime subscribers.
Yes.
That like to focus on certain things, like the guy that's always talking about the big guys. We'll make him like, the best big man award, that kind of thing.
So like they named a head coaching job after a big donor.
Yes.
I
think we'll do that. I think we'll do that. The guy that's always asking about freshmen or the next guy. When are we going to see this player that we never played? That's where who we want to see next year. We got a category for that too. So I think that'll be fun. That'll be fun.
It. So do we want to start with the big awards first? The overall, not MVP, but like, what did we call it?
We're going to do most outstanding. The last one we're going to do is going to be the player we're most looking forward to seeing in 2021. We're going to do most outstanding last, and then we're going to just start off with best skill. We'll go into the big men. We'll go into some of the underrated clutch and all that kind of stuff. So let's rock and roll that way.
All right, I love it. Okay, so our first award on the day is going to be the best skill player, and this. By the way, I should mention today's podcast is going to be offense only. There's so many of these fun awards that we wanted to break it up into two podcasts. So
and we wanted to talk about it too. We wanted to be able to explain like kind of why we went with certain picks and things.
Absolutely. Like that. So our first award is best skill player on the offensive side, and that encompasses running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. And as much as tight ends want to be considered skill players, and they are, we in my vernacular, they've always been called big skill. Right? Those are the tight ends and like the linebackers. So we put them in a different category. So this category is skill. So running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. Who's your best skill player for 2020? Bryan Driskell.
I actually went back and forth on this one a little bit. And I battled between Javon Mckinley and Kyron Williams. And I saw it settled on Kyron Williams because his usage was so much more consistent that I thought he was their best skill player this year. I thought he started the season off well. You're talking about 100 yards in the first game against Duke. He had over 90 receiving yards against Duke. Ran hard all the way through. Had a couple games here and there where his production wasn't great, but like against Pitt, for example. But even in that game, he had 2 third down conversions that were clutch in that game. He caught the ball in that game. And he maximized the yards that were there. I mean, that was a team that was geared towards stopping the run. And even when he was only getting 2 or 3 yards, he was getting them physical, and he forced Pitt to still focus on the run game, which then opened up some big plays in the pass game. And, and then just you look at how he played against Clemson. He was great in the first win over Clemson. He ran really hard and was effective against Alabama. The only reason he didn't run for more yards is because they stopped running the ball in the second half because they were getting blown out. So I thought for the course of the season, it was Kyron Williams. I started to go with Javon Mckinley, and I'll get into the reasons why later, but he just wasn't used consistently enough, because a receiver is only as good as the amount of times the quarterback throws him the ball. But when you look at his blocking and you look at some of the runs that Kyron Williams ripped off, you go watch that long touchdown run against Clemson, and you watch Javon McKinley putting a cornerback on his backside who couldn't then affect the play that was run right at him. He was the other guy that I had in the conversation. But at the end of the day, just that consistency from Kyron Williams. And and the ability to stay healthy despite a heavy workload all season.
Yeah.
For a guy who didn't play last year was really important to me. And so that's why Kyron Williams is my most outstanding offensive player.
Well, this one we're going to agree on. Skill player, right. This one we're going to agree on. I had Kyron Williams as well for all the reasons that you just mentioned. I think the fact that he stayed healthy with the workload that they gave him, whereas I don't even know that they needed to give him as much of a workload as they did. And obviously you and I have talked about the fact that we wanted to see Chris Tyree get more touches, et cetera. But
that's why they need to go tempo, run more plays, then you have more touches to spread around. But that's a different show, different day.
That's a different show. But for 2020, what he was able to bring to the table, not only did he answer the bell every time that he had to and do it in a very effective way, always falling forward, when he would run the ball. I mean, just running angry, as I had mentioned in the past. But that's what I want from a running back. He did all of those things. He checked all of those boxes, and it was his first year. I mean, it's his second year in the program, but it's his first year getting any kind of touches.
He had 4 carries in 2019. And,
they were all at the beginning.
Right. Something else, Vince, is I think he was also an emotional trendsetter for this team. And I think that, for me, factored into this as well as his swagger, his attitude. I said in a previous show, he's cocky, and I mean that in a very complimentary fashion. I think that swagger was something this offense needed, because a lot of the other players have Ian Book, Javon McKinley. They're very poised, composed, not really emotional guy, which is fine. It's fine.
Yeah, right.
But you also need that balance, and Kyron brought that balance, and I thought he fit. I thought he fit really well in that regard.
I agree. I completely agree. So yeah, Kyron Williams was my guy too, and it really. I think it was more of a debate for you than it was for me.
It wasn't a long debate. It just was like for like a minute. I was like, okay,
sure,
but this it just every box kind of checked Kyron.
Yes,
production, consistency, versatility, just emotional. What he brought to the table just checked every box for me.
Absolutely,
and that's why he ended up being the winner in that conversation.
No question. So we agree on Kyron Williams. That's one. Check.
Okay. We had to get one of the ones we agree with out of the way. So
right?
For those that are always asking, we never disagree. We're going to disagree on several of these, which is what makes it fun to me.
Absolutely. That's why I've been looking forward to this one so much. So the next award that we're going to hand out is the best big man. And again, that encompasses tight ends and offensive line. So the best big man award for 2020 for Bryan Driskell is?
It's Liam Eichenberg. And I think that, to me, is a no-brainer. It was funny when I saw that there were actually people out there that had Aaron Banks as a first-team All-American for Notre Dame and not Liam Eichenberg. And to me, when I watched Notre Dame play, it was a no-brainer who Notre Dame's best offensive lineman was. To me, it was a no-brainer who the best offensive tackle in the country was, with all due respect to Alex Leatherwood and Brady Christensen at BYU. Liam Eichenberg, to me, this year, what was different about his game was he was consistent, which he was last year, but he was more dominant this year. And I think that was the big thing for me, is that was the step he needed to make in his third year as a starter. And this is where people might disagree with me. I actually think he was better in this year than Mike McGlinchey was in 2017, and I don't think it was close. I actually think he was every bit as good, if not better, than Ronnie Stanley was in 2015, and I'll say that for 2 reasons. Number one, he didn't give up a single sack this year. Ronnie Stanley gave up, I think, 3 or 4 in 2015. And he did that against we talked in our last show, recapping the offense, how they played some really good edge rushers this year. And he didn't give up a sack all year. Didn't even really give up anything close to a sack this year. And I think that he was a little bit more consistent and effective in the run game than Ronnie Stanley was in 2015. Where Ronnie Stanley and Mike McGlinchey people will argue is they had the flashier plays. For me, at the left tackle, I don't care about flash. Sure. I care about getting the job done snap after snap after snap. And Liam Eichenberg was a stronger, more physical version of Zach Martin. Just that you just knew he was going to win that battle every single snap. And to me, it wasn't close. And that says a lot when you consider how good the Notre Dame offensive line and how good Michael Mayer was this season. To have, for me, Liam Eichenberg, it wasn't even there was no discussion. It was like Liam Eichenberg. Should it be anybody else? No. Liam Eichenberg.
No.
That's how it was for me.
Well, and again, I'm going to agree with you on this one, but it wasn't not even a problem. The issue in this regard was that it was him, and then there was a bit of a gap to everybody else. And that's not saying that everybody else didn't have a good season,
which speaks volumes about how good he was.
Exactly.
More than anything else.
And the fact that the AP had him as the second team, and the only publication to not have him as a first team All-American.
Yeah. He would have been a unanimous All-American had it not been for the AP.
Correct.
I thought.
And there's been under 40 of those in Notre Dame history, and he belonged on that list. And that's very disappointing. And I realize he probably doesn't care. Maybe, it's just an award.
If you know Liam Eichenberg, you know he doesn't care.
But it's something that he deserved.
Yes.
And I feel for him because he should have gotten that award.
And the thing is, they had Aaron Banks the AP had Aaron Banks as a first teamer.
Yes.
And with all due respect to Aaron was a good player, but I don't know how anyone can watch every snap of how this team played this year and think to themselves, oh, Aaron Banks was better than Liam Eichenberg.
Right.
I don't see it. And again, that speaks to how good Liam Eichenberg was.
Sure.
I thought Aaron Banks was very good this season.
Absolutely.
But I don't even think Aaron Banks was their second best offensive lineman, but we'll get into that here in one of these other awards.
Fair enough. All right. So we're in agreement on the first two: best skill, best big man award. So our third award is kind of a fun one: top newcomer. And newcomer.
We're going traditional newcomer. Not this red shirt freshman stuff.
You and I had that conversation yesterday about how ridiculous it is to put somebody on the freshman All-American team when they're a sophomore in school.
Kyron Williams is in his fourth semester of college.
Yeah.
Right? Because he was an early enrollee.
Yes.
He's not a newcomer.
No.
He's in his fourth semester of college.
And he's not a freshman.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
He's not.
So that's a problem for me. But again, that's another issue. But this one's top newcomer, and it can be a freshman, a true freshman, we'll say that, or a transfer because
which
it's a
doesn't
newcomer.
Really apply to the offense this year because I don't think either one of us are going to look at Ben Skoranek. So
it doesn't, but it was there as an option.
He would be in consideration if you wanted to.
He is available to be selected for this particular award. So
and this one's a no-brainer. You go ahead and do this one. This one is a no-brainer.
Oh, if we had the same. Okay.
Yeah.
So
this is the last of we're on the same page. Ones as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So top newcomer for me, again, Ben Skoranek was available. I went with Michael Mayer, and because of the way he was used, it's not close.
He was really good in how he was used.
So Captain Obvious over there.
But for me, Vince, we beefed about how Tommy Tremble was used. Our beef wasn't that Mayer was being used instead of Tremble. It was, why aren't they both being used?
Correct.
Because Michael Mayer is really
and he
really
deserved
good.
to be used the way he was. Yes. I would have been just as upset if they weren't using him to the degree that they ended up doing it. Was I honestly a little bit surprised that they did? Yeah, I was a little bit surprised because he is a true freshman. But his talent level is so good at that position.
Like a true freshman.
And you've mentioned this before, and I'll just echo it. It's easier to get on the field as a tight end in Notre Dame's offense than it is as a wide receiver.
If you're physically ready, and that's the big key. If you're physically ready, and Michael Mayer was physically ready,
so
there's just not as much complexity to what he has to learn snap after snap.
Absolutely. So, but because of the way they used him, because they let him on the field, he is above and beyond the winner of this award. I mean, it has to be Michael Mayer. He had one of the best seasons as a true freshman that I can remember since I've been covering this football team. It was impressive to watch, and it gets me giddy about the next 2 years that he's going to be in an Irish uniform.
I think the last freshman that I saw that was this dominant when used was Michael Floyd back in 2008. For me,
and that's fair. Yeah,
that would be that. Kyle Rudolph was good that year too. Michael Floyd was a difference maker as a true freshman. Michael Mayer was a difference maker. And it wasn't just the numbers; it was how he put those numbers. I mean, I could go back and put together third down clips of him. I think he had 42 catches. Over 30 of them were moved the chains, and a chunk of them were on third down. And there was a lot of times where he'd catch the ball on third down, several yards short of the sticks, and move the chains. Because he's just such a gifted player. And the thing about it is he still has a lot to learn as a player. I mean, there's route running improvements that need to be made. Now, he he was pretty advanced for a freshman. But again, that's advanced for a freshman. That's not advanced for where he should be as a junior or senior. So when you think about that, it really starts to get you excited about what kind of player he could be. But 42 catches, 450 yards, quality blocker for a freshman.
Yeah.
Again, for a freshman, quality blocker. I thought the thing about it is when he missed in the run game, it was never about a lack of willingness or toughness. It was always like, you got to improve that first step, take a bigger drop step. You got to really reach around that guy. He was too level, and the guy beat him inside.
About angles,
technique thing, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. The stuff that you don't expect the freshman to necessarily know.
Right.
So tremendously bright future ahead for Michael Mayer, and it was a no-brainer. And again, that was when you consider Ben Skoranek led the team in receiving touchdowns, was third in receiving yards, fourth in receptions. Chris Tyree, had some big moments this year. There were some newcomers to choose from. But it was to me a no-brainer that it was going to go to Michael Mayer.
Agreed. So this is where two paths diverge into the wood, as they say. I told you I was getting excited about being back at school. All right. So our next award, and this one's wide open, to be honest with you, because I think there are numerous guys you could pick for this award, but most underrated.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's definition of underrated, I think, is different. And I'll give you the reasoning for mine when I talk about mine. I'm interested to see where you go here, but who is your most underrated offensive player for 2020?
So I went with two because I literally over the last 2 days could not choose less than two.
So you cheated.
Well, you know what?
Joking.
I made the rules so I can change them whenever I want. So it's there's one guy that to me is underrated nationally, and there's another guy that's underrated amongst the fan base. And that's where I'm going. The guy to me that gets underrated nationally, but I think he is appreciated by the fan base, is Robert Hainsey. To me, Robert Hainsey was Notre Dame's second best offensive lineman this year. His season, to me, very much mirrored the one that Zach Martin had in 2013. Because what you and I have talked about in the past is one of the biggest postseason awards travesties that have happened in Notre Dame. The two biggest ones were both involving linemen. It was one, Quentin Nelson not winning the Outland Award in 2017 was a joke. The other was the fact that Zach Martin in 2013 wasn't an All-American. That was one of the most brilliant seasons to me, that was probably the best Notre Dame offensive line season, lineman amongst the tackles. And that's impressive when you consider tackles that Notre Dame has had. But the problem was he wasn't flashy. It was just dominance, snap after snap. But it wasn't the kind of dominance like Mike McGlinchey, where he's going to drive a guy 6 yards off the ball and just flatten him. It was just getting the job done at a high level, snap after snap after snap.
Sure.
Robert Hainsey was, to me, very similar to that. He had one game where I thought he struggled a little against Pitt. But other than that, I thought his steadiness was just out. You never had to worry about the right side of the offensive line. And I think the thing that was an uptick for him this year, for me, is he was a lot better in the run game this year. He's always been kind of a get-the-job-done guy in the run game in the past. This year, we started to see him have some dominant moments, really pushing that edge outside and opening up the cutback lane for Kyron Williams, really slamming down on that seal block on some of the pulls and counters, really getting to the second level and just taking care of business. So I thought his all-around game was outstanding. The fact that he wasn't named to a single All-American award, but Tommy Kramer was, and Jarrett Patterson was, and two guys who were very good but missed games. The gap between Tommy Kramer, and this is not a knock on Tommy Kramer. I have tremendous respect for Tommy Kramer, but the gap between Robert Hainsey and Tommy Kramer this year in play was pretty wide. Yeah, and I would argue that even though Aaron Banks had more dominant moments, Robert Hainsey was far more steady than Aaron Banks was. And as an offensive lineman, I want steady over inconsistent and dominant. That's just me. And that's as an offensive coordinator and as a quarterback. I want to know that my tackle or my guard is going to just get the job done every play. I don't care if you pancake a guy. Just don't let me get hit. Don't let me get sacked. So, and then from a Notre Dame fan base standpoint, I don't think Notre Dame fans appreciate how good Javon Mckinley was this year. And the reason is it's a numbers-driven game, right? That's just a fact. People look at numbers and they say, oh, wow, that guy was good. Well, what makes you say that? Well, he caught this many balls for that many yards. To me, Javon McKinley's problem was twofold. Number one is he just wasn't targeted enough, and people don't put enough appreciation into blocking as a runner. I mean, I could show you at least a dozen runs this year that 2-yard gains turned into 10-yard gains, or 10-yard gains turned into 40-yard gains because of Javon McKinley's blocking. That's big time.
Huge.
And he can't control when he's targeted. And people say, well, he had to get open more. Trust me, he was open enough to catch 60, 70 balls this year, just flat out. And I have a number that I want to kind of put into context for this. So Pro Football Focus does this thing where they kind of say, how many times is a receiver targeted? We can be a completion or incompletion, right? Just how many times is the ball thrown at him? And Javon McKinley this year was targeted 59 times, according to Pro Football Focus, caught 42 passes. That is a 71.2% completion rate, okay? I'm going to tell you what the leading receivers at Notre Dame in the past years had from a completion percentage on targets. So 71.2 for Javon McKinley. Chase Claypool last year, 61.1. Miles Boykin, 60.2. Equanimity St. Brown in 2017, 46.5. St. Brown in 2016, 65.2. Will Fuller in 2015, 62%. And the closest, and this is, they started doing this in 2014. This is the closest we've seen. Will Fuller in 2014, 68.5. There's only one receiver within 3 percentage points. Actually, there was only one receiver within 6 percentage points of Javon McKinley, and that was Will Fuller back in 2014. When you're having that level of, the ball comes to me, it's getting caught.
Yeah.
Right? 17.1 yards per catch. So it wasn't like he was catching a bunch of 2-yard, hitches and things like that. This was a guy who had a high completion rate, and a lot of his targets were down the field.
50-50
That's
balls.
impressive.
Yeah, right.
Yes. And the other thing I love about Javon McKinley, too, is he had his best games in the biggest moments. Florida State against Asante Samuel, Clemson, North Carolina. When he needed a big game, when they needed a big game and they targeted him, he made the plays. And that's, I mean, you can't ask for anything more than that. And when they targeted him, they scored 39 points a game when he had at least 5 catches. Against Power 5 teams, that was 5 Power 5 teams where he caught fewer than 5 passes, they averaged 20 points per game. And so I just don't think fans appreciated how good Javon McKinley was this year, because he doesn't have the sexy numbers. And because he never, as for his career, didn't live up to the hype that was around him. But Javon McKinley was an outstanding football player at Notre Dame in 2020. And had he been targeted as much as he should have been targeted, we'd be talking about him, because he had 4 games with 100 receiving yards. The only 2 receivers in the last decade to do that, Fuller and Michael Floyd. That's it. Not Chase Claypool, not Miles Boykin, not TJ Jones, not Equanimity St. Brown, not DeVaris Daniels, Will Fuller, and Michael Floyd. And when you consider how infrequently he was targeted, that says a lot.
Yeah. No, the scoring one is what screams to me is when he was targeted 5 or had 5 catches or more. Mm-hmm. They scored 39 points, and when he didn't, they scored 20.
It's not a coincidence. And a big part of that is because of so many of his catches were down the field throws in those games.
Absolutely. And remember, the knock on him coming into this season was that he gets all of his yards and his accolades against the group of 5 teams.
Because they never played him and never threw him the ball in those.
You and I know that, but that was the knock on Javon McKinley. Right. Well, is he going to show up, when the lights are the brightest?
Right.
The answer is yeah, he did. Yeah. So anyway, so you had a tie between Javon McKinley and
Robert Hainsey.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. For me, my most underrated, I'm going with Jarrett Patterson, the center, and here's why. And I think part of the reason that I went this route was because I think it became obvious to people when he got hurt how important he was to this offensive line. And we heard some of the other offensive linemen talking about him after he went down. He was the captain on the field. He's the one that made the calls. I think he got exponentially better from last year to this year. But I still think that from a fan base perspective, I think he was still looked at as kind of the 5th wheel on this offensive line, because he was the newest guy and the youngest guy, and he'll be the guy that's returning, et cetera. I look at it a different way. After he went down, it was so obvious how important he was, because look, Josh Lugg is no slouch of an offensive lineman. he couldn't carry Jarrett Patterson's water at center. And again, that's nothing against
and he's
Josh
not
Lugg.
a center.
It's not a center.
Yeah, right.
And I totally get that. And hopefully Jarrett Patterson's not going to be a center next year either, but that's a whole other conversation. And so Zeke Correll did yeoman's work coming in and being the young guy and kind of figuring it out as he went along. Great job by him. But I still think it just made it so obvious how good Jarrett Patterson was when he was in the lineup. So I put him in for most underrated player.
It's hard to be really good up front and to really run the ball effectively if you're not really good at center. Yeah. In today's era, because teams are focusing so much more on athleticism up the middle. You know, it used to be you had these big guys and you just needed someone that could kind of hold their own. Now you need centers that can get up to the second level, that can get reach blocks on outside zones, that can also get movement. They have to be good at pass protection because teams do so much more inside blitzing now because the ball comes out so quickly with quarterbacks nowadays that we can't come off the edge because the ball's going to be gone.
Yep.
So there's so much more complexity to me of what teams are doing to attack the center up the middle that, you know, the fact that he was a steady player. I thought his game was starting to really ascend when he got hurt.
Yep.
After a little bit of inconsistency early, but yeah, he's incredibly important to it. And next year, we're going to have a podcast. I love how we're doing all these like teasers for future podcasts. You know, we're going to have a podcast on before you can figure out what to do with the rest of the offensive line. You got to figure out what you're going to do with Jarrett Patterson. And that's going to be a podcast we're going to do here coming up pretty soon.
Absolutely. So our next award is the one I had the most trouble with, to be perfectly honest with you. It is the most clutch award on offense. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go first here, Bryan, if you don't mind.
We're definitely going to have a disagreement on this one.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's what it's all about. But I went with Liam Eichenberg. And my reasoning behind that is, to me, the definition of most clutch is, are you showing up when it matters? Are you putting on, grabbing your lunch pail, your hard hat, however you want to say it, are you showing up when it matters? And Liam Eichenberg had no problem showing up every single snap. And this award was cemented for me when I remembered the whole getting punched in the eye, having that black eye, basically
Florida State, right?
Sealed shut, and still going back in the game and playing at a high level. That pretty much cemented the clutch award for me. If you can do that, and I would look, I'm not going to challenge people to go out and give themselves a black eye and see if they can still do their work.
Please don't do that. And if that happens, you contact Vince DeDario. I have nothing to do with that. Irish Breakdown has nothing to do with that recommendation whatsoever.
But the fact that he was able to continue being an offensive lineman with one eye, come on, man. That's amazing to me. So Liam Eichenberg gets my most clutch award. He just, every snap in, snap out, day in, day out, game in, game out. You can count on him. He's clutch.
So the thing that you said for me is what made this tough. You talked about, are you going to show up when the lights are brightest? And my clutch player didn't always do that, but there's a reason I'm still going with him, and that's Ian Book. And the reason I say that is, number one, I think a big part of Ian Book's struggles this year were more coaching related necessarily than Ian Book related.
Game plan related.
Yes.
I get you.
Game plan related, personnel usage related. The game plan against Alabama, for example, was not conducive to Ian Book being successful. You were asking him to be he had to be perfect in those situations.
Right.
And they were asking him to make reads that he had proven throughout his career he wasn't good at. It wasn't playing to his strengths.
Absolutely.
Being clutch to me is more about, the way I viewed it, is more about when a play needs to be made, are you the guy that's going to step up and make it? And that's where I took it, as opposed to being good in big games kind of thing. It's more of a moment thing. That's clutch to me. And when you look at Ian Book this year, even in some of the games he didn't play well, he was still clutch when it mattered. I think of the Louisville game, for example. Against a terrible defense, Notre Dame had 12 points. He was below 100 yards passing in the fourth quarter. But they needed to ice that game late, and he made that clutch third down throw to Ben. I think it was Ben Skoranek on a crosser. Quick read, got the ball out. And then on the run that really put the game away to Kyron Williams, he's out there lead blocking for him, you know. When you look at, for example, I think of the Clemson game. You know, again, another game where he had his struggles, you know, fumbled the ball into the end zone. The offense hadn't scored a touchdown since the second play of the game, right? And then he goes out there in that fourth quarter, and he makes the big pass to Avery Davis. But remember, they were backed up in their own territory. He had to make a couple throws to get them out from their own end zone to get them to that point. And you look at the North Carolina game, when the defense was struggling early, Ian made some big throws, hitting Javon down the field. He made some big throws, made some big plays to kind of spark them. You look at his ability to make some big plays to help them pull away from Boston College. So as I just look through the season, even though I had a lot of criticisms of his play, of how he was used, the fact of the matter is he was going to step up and make plays. And the other thing I really respected about Ian Book this year, Vince, and really throughout his career, was he was a guy that no matter how poorly he was playing, if he needed to make a play late, he would make it. And I go back to the 2019 game against Virginia Tech. And I heard a couple people at one point in time say, well, that's why he should be a Heisman contender. And I'm thinking, you're out of your mind. You know what I mean?
Because he had one good drive.
He was terrible in that game. And he was a big reason they needed the fourth quarter drive. But you know what? When the fourth quarter moment came, as terrible as he had been, he'd thrown 2 red zone interceptions that game. He made the plays, completes a 4th and 10 pass down the field to Chase Claypool on a deep end cut. That's poise, you know? And I think of the LSU game back in you know, the game he's kind of where he became a fan favorite. Before the big, you know, he made 2 huge throws to Miles Boykin. The biggest throw to me was the 3rd 19 throw where he fits it in between 2 guys before the final touchdown drive. But in the third quarter, it was kind of like the Clemson game. In the third quarter, he had a terrible Notre Dame offense was struggling. They weren't moving the ball effectively. They finally get a drive going, and Ian Book throws an interception near the sideline. And I'm thinking, oh, they're done. They got no chance. And it just didn't rattle them, you know? So that to me is a clutch award. So for me, it's almost kind of like a lifetime achievement award kind of thing where in a lot of ways, Ian Book limited the offense, whether it was his play or how he was used.
Sure.
However, the one thing that you can never take away from Ian Book was if the game was close in the fourth quarter and you needed him to make a play, with one exception, he was going to make it. The exception being the Georgia game in 2019.
No, I get that.
And that's something that I really respected about him as a player.
And so basically, I think what it comes down to is your definition of clutch and mine are a little bit different.
You're talking big games. I'm talking moments.
I was thinking along the lines of, and I almost called you to add this award. It would be the most grit or something along those lines. Gamer. You know, however you want to say it, that is where Ian Book fits for me. Because you're right. He never gave up. Like there was never a time that you can point to where he was like, yep, Ian Book kind of much cashed this one in. You know, he's done. He's just throwing the ball out of bounds. Doesn't care anymore.
One of the concerns I had about Brandon Wimbush was if Brandon Wimbush started bad, he couldn't get himself out of that rut.
I agree with that.
Now, if he started fast, you had no chance. I mean, you didn't have a chance to be in a competitive game against Notre Dame.
Right.
But when he started poorly, it was just going to be poor for 60 minutes. And Ian Book could start poorly, play poorly, but then when it mattered, he could get himself out of that rut and make a play that needed to be made.
That makes perfect sense to me. And to me, like I said, to me, that's more of like grit, heart. And I get the Lifetime Achievement Award that he's a winner, Bryan. He's a winner. Okay.
You just had to ruin it. You had to ruin the whole thing. Just had to ruin the whole thing.
No, but I see where you're coming from, and I agree with all the points that you made. It just didn't fit for me for this particular
Brian Kelly over there handing you notes or something like that. Like, make sure you talk about Ian Book being 30-5 as a starter.
He's right over here. Right over here. All right. So anyway, most clutch. Yours is Ian Book. Mine was Liam Eichenberg. All right. Best comeback player. And comeback player can be however you want to define what a comeback player is. It could be
injury. It could be adversity.
It could be whatever.
Either one. Yep.
So what route did you take for a comeback player of 2020?
I went Avery Davis because this was a guy that for me, because I don't think I told you this one beforehand. When I think of Avery Davis, I think of a kid that was recruited to play quarterback.
Yep.
Moved to running back, then moved to corner, then moved back to running back, then moved to receiver. This kid had every reason in the world to transfer.
Sure.
He was not going to be a part of the plans. I mean, it was clear that he wasn't going to, be a factor last year, and just had no reason to come into the season playing with the confidence he played with. And he was, I mean, even the first game of the year, he makes that look. The Duke game was far more competitive than it should have been. It was his tough grab in the end zone that really put that game away. Really tough grab.
Right. That's right.
And again, his issue is his numbers could have been a lot better if quarterback looked for him a little bit more, or if they designed plays. But he had 3 big catches against Clemson. Obviously, the 2 at the end of the game. The 51-yard post is the one that gets a lot of the attention, but the play he made on 3rd down to score. I mean, if he doesn't make that catch in traffic, and not only make the catch, but to have the awareness to stop and work backwards because he knew he was covered if he kept working, was just really savvy. That you're like, this guy played receiver for like a year and a half.
I was going to say, and you can tell the maturation process of him as a receiver
right
on that play right there, because he's not a receiver. I mean, he is now, but he was a quarterback.
Right.
And then he was on defense. I mean, that takes time, and that particular skill is a feel thing for a wide receiver. That's not something that's on the card that you hold up with the play on it. You know what I mean? Like that's a feel for, my quarterback's in trouble. I need to get open. I need to find an opening. I need to either sit in it or I need to keep going. And
it was a pretty big moment.
A huge moment.
Need that to tie the game and to go to overtime. So, comeback to me for him was more about adversity. I mean, you could have looked at Tommy Kramer, Robert Hainsey, who came back from injuries last year. You could have looked at Ben Skoranek, who the only reason he was at Notre Dame this year is because of an injury that he suffered last year at Northwestern. There's a lot of guys that I think could have been in this conversation that you say, well, but for me, when I look at the adversity that Avery Davis overcame to get to this point, there's a lot of kids in this age of transfers. There's a lot of kids that would have never had the willingness to stick it out the way that Avery Davis did. And then not only stick it out, but then to become a clutch player. And he should have had another 50-yard touchdown against Clemson in the ACC title game. He was open on a post route, and they never looked for him. Smoked the guy. Yep. And so, he played well. He played tough. And even when he wasn't getting the ball, he just kept working. And I just had a lot of respect for the job that he did this year for Notre Dame.
Absolutely. I went a different route, although Avery Davis was one of my finalists for best comeback player, no question about it. If you take the podcast right now, folks, and you just rewind it about 10 minutes, you'll find everything you need to know about the person that I picked for comeback player of the year, and that's Javon Mckinley. And the reason that he made the list for me here was because – look, he came into Notre Dame as a 5-star wide receiver. I mean, had
close to it.
Every accolade that you can imagine. I remember watching him in the U.S. Army All-American game, getting all excited, like this kid's going to be good.
As a junior in high school, Javon Mckinley had over 50 catches and 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns in the playoffs
alone
against St. John Bosco, De La Salle, Orange Lutheran. I mean, against programs that had lots of D1
national
players on it, right?
Programs.
This wasn't like playing against bad competition. This was against best of the best.
Right.
Bishop Amat, they played in the playoff. And he had over 50, and he returned a touchdown on a kick return against De La Salle in the state title game.
Right.
So this guy was a beast in high school.
I was ecstatic about him. And then he got lost in the shuffle for a myriad of reasons.
Part of it his fault.
We don't need to get into all of it. Absolutely.
Part of it, program philosophy. Part of it's his fault.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely. And it was. But to stick it out, you talked about, Avery Davis heading into the transfer portal. Javon Mckinley could have done that exact same thing without any issue. And frankly, Notre Dame would have been like, we'll see you later. Thanks for playing. But he didn't. And he stuck around. He got his opportunity. And frankly, when we first were thinking about the 2020 season, we weren't thinking about Javon Mckinley being as big of a part of this offense as he ended up being. Now, with Austin, I think people looked at him as the number one guy. And I see you're making your face over there, and I get it. But
I did.
I'm talking in general.
I have the articles to prove it.
I'm talking in general. People didn't expect what Javon McKinley actually brought to the table this year. And
which is why, to the point we made earlier about him, which is why I think he was so overlooked this year.
Absolutely.
Because people weren't expecting him to have a big year.
Yep. And you broke down all the numbers. I'm not going to get into that again. I have them written here. But you broke it down. When they used him the way they should have used him, Notre Dame's offense was really good. And when they didn't, they weren't. And that's just bottom line. That tells you right there, he was a player that they counted on. He's the comeback player for me, no question. And
he was able to rehabilitate his character, and his reputation. When you think about the arrest and the fact that he got kicked off the team and all those kind of things, he didn't allow his worst moment to define him. And I think that's important. I think that's a lesson all of us can take from that. Don't let your worst moment define you. You know, it's how you claw back from that, how you grow from that, the changes you make from that are going to be what define you. And now we're talking about Javon McKinley being defined by a hardworking, tough, overcoming adversity kind of guy, not what he would have been defined as had he left Notre Dame at his lowest.
I got you.
And to me, that's why I think your case for him being the comeback player is very, very good one. No question about it.
All right, we got 2 more awards to go here, Bryan. First, we're going to talk about – this is the big one, really. The most outstanding. So you could call it MVP if you wanted. We're calling it most outstanding.
Yeah, because MVP is value, right?
Absolutely.
And the most outstanding player isn't always the most valuable player.
And it wouldn't have been, probably. I would have had a different answer for this, to be honest with you.
This is the best player for Notre Dame.
Correct. So I'll go
regardless
first.
of position or anything, just the best player.
Right. I'll go first on this one because I think we're going to be different. And my most outstanding offensively was Kyron Williams.
You went with the numbers.
Look, it's personal bias, okay? I love watching this kid play the game of football. I love the way he picks up blitzes. I love the way he runs the football. I love the attitude that he has with his teammates. So I love what he brings to the table as a teammate. I think he's going to make a captain, one of these years. I just love everything about this kid. And I think that if you take him out of this offense, it's a different offense. And it's in 2020. So he's my most outstanding. I think he's got talent to burn. I think he's only going to get better. Again, this is a personal preference. I just love watching this kid play the game of football. He plays it with an unbridled passion. He plays it with his emotions on his sleeve. Any other cliche that you can come up with, that applies for me when it comes to Kyron Williams. So most outstanding, it's Kyron Williams.
I get where you're coming from. And I think obviously the reason it's easy to pick a skill player is because they have numbers to back it up.
Sure. Absolutely.
For me, it's not close. It's Liam Eichenberg. He was their best player this year.
And he'll get drafted the highest, most likely, as well.
Well, and again, that's also about value. I mean, a running back's, I don't think there was even a first-round draft pick at running back this past year.
You're right,
Hilaire might have gone like the last pick of the first round. But we've seen years recently where pretty good running backs fall because there's just not the value. So to me, that's a value thing too. I just think Liam Eichenberg was their best player. He was the most steady player. Yeah. He was their most dominant player. Not dominance, most clutch. Not dominance from a physical dominance like driving a guy 10 yards off the ball, but just winning doing his job and then doing it impressively.
Yeah, absolutely.
You go look at that 60-plus yard touchdown run against Clemson, and Kyron had that great dead leg and ripped it off. But I mean, go watch the blocking Liam Eichenberg had to spring him. Just blew a linebacker up, and
right. Sure.
We could do that all year. And Kyron was a good player, don't get me wrong, but to me, production-wise, we've seen this before. I think the only thing he did differently that we haven't seen in the past is he showed up every week. And that's big. I mean, Tony Jones, he averaged 5.3 yards a catch. Tony Jones averaged 5.9 yards per carry, excuse me. Dexter Williams is over 6. Josh Adams is like 6.5. I mean, he was a grinder and he did his job well. But, to me, 5.3 yards per carry behind this offensive line is not something that I'm like, best player. That's just me. But I do love his grit and all that. But for me, you knew what every play that Liam Eichenberg was gonna win. And when he didn't win a rep, you're like, whoa, that was surprising. But he was so good. He was a consensus All-American. He was a first-team All-American by, I think, 6 or 7 different organizations. 4 of the 5 that go into the unanimous All-American award. Was just their best, to me, just their best player. And again, when you're talking about, when I say he was hands down their best player on a team with Robert Hainsey, Aaron Banks, Michael Mayer, Kyron Williams, Javon McKinley, Jarrett Patterson, to say hands down just speaks volumes about how good Liam Eichenberg actually was this season. And he was outstanding. Like I said, I'll stack his 2020 season up against Mike McGlinchey's All-American season, against Ronnie Stanley's All-American season, against Zach Martin's should have been All-American season in 2013. I'll stack him up against all of them, you know. And again, if you're someone who likes flash as an offensive lineman, you're probably gonna think I'm nuts. If you're someone who likes an offensive lineman that just dominates snap after snap after snap, even if it's not the Quentin Nelson blowing a guy up and just pancaking a guy, or, you know, getting Rasheem Green to, you know, no mas, you know, in that game against USC in 2017, you know, not going to answer the bell anymore. Then that's not who Liam Eichenberg is. But sure. Dominance on a snap-to-snap basis, winning his job, opening up holes, giving the quarterback time to throw, all those kind of things that the skill players get the credit for. It was the line that was getting it done. You know, all those times Liam, you know, Ian Book scrambling around. Well, that's only happening because the linemen are staying on their guys.
Sure.
You know,
yeah, right.
You know, just and to your point earlier too, I think there was a tone set by Liam Eichenberg as well this year, which is we're going to show up every day in practice and we're going to bust it.
Yeah.
And we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and there's going to be nothing's going to stop us. Bust it up, not going to stop. You know, and that's that thing that you talked about with Kyron Williams. I think you can make a case for Liam Eichenberg, and I think they set the tone, the dominance tone, and then you have a running back like Kyron Williams who complements that really well. To me, that speaks volumes about how good this team was, which I think in a lot of ways it was more of the sum of the parts more than just individual standouts. But I think that was also more because of scheme decisions and play calling decisions more than, I think this team should have scored a lot more than it did.
Well, yeah,
but that's a different story for a different day. But to me, you know, Liam Eichenberg was just, from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, was just, you know, week after week after week, like, yeah that guy played great. And I don't know if there's another player that you could say every week, you're like, yep, played great, week after week. And that's why he gets my most outstanding player. Hard to
argue with that. You make a lot of good points. This last award this is a fun one for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of had to do some thinking, because this could have been somebody that we've seen play, or it could have been somebody that we haven't seen at all that we assume is going to play in 2021. So there's a couple different ways that you could go with this one. So the title of the award is Most Excited to See in 2021 on the offense. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. I decided to stay with somebody that we saw this year who's definitely coming back, and that's a small number of guys on the offensive side. Because if you remember, there's not a whole lot coming back on the offensive side. We got one lineman, tight end, running back, 2 running backs, and a slot receiver. So I went with a running back, and it's not Kyron Williams, it's Chris Tyree. And I guess his talent is undeniable, right? We've seen what he can do when he has the ball in his hands, whether it's on kick returns, whether it's in the backfield, catching balls out of the backfield, getting handoffs, whatever the case may be. My hope, my prayer, Bryan, is that they expand his role more moving into next year, because your backfield is going to be the same. We're not losing anybody from that backfield. So is it going to be the same old, where Chris Tyree is kind of an afterthought at times?
Breather.
Yeah. Or is he going to be a 1-2 punch with Kyron Williams? Because I think this can be a dynamic backfield if that's the case. And I'm sorry, you can't go wrong if you give the ball to Chris Tyree. So I'm also hoping they take the reins off of him a little bit in the kick return game. In the Alabama game, for example, he fumbles the very first kickoff return. He fair catches every single kick after that. You're telling me that a dynamic kick return couldn't have changed the tide of that game at some point, and you're taking that out of his hands. that bothered me personally. I'm hoping that they take the reins off of him a little bit in that regard. I'm hoping they expand his role in the backfield. So I'm excited to see Chris Tyree in 2021. Brian?
All this love you're giving Kyron Williams, and now you want to get less touches? What's going on, Vince? I don't understand. For me, I went with Xavier Watts, and this was a tough one for me because
that was my second place. Yeah, I knew you were going to go there.
It was like, okay, I could go Jordan Johnson. I could go somebody that played. I'm really looking forward to seeing Michael Mayer now that he's got a year, though. Because remember, Michael Mayer was not an early enrollee. He didn't have that 3 months in the weight room that the early, even though those guys lost a lot because of the pandemic, he didn't even have that 3 month head start that they got in the weight room. He didn't show up till June, and that's a pretty good tight end depth chart. And to have 42 catches on a team that went 10-0 in the regular season, and to bounce back the way he did after some struggles against Clemson, I thought was impressive. I mean, he could be really good next year. Avery Davis, how's he going to be if he gets used more? I think the easy answer with Tyler Buchner, just because the quarterback's always the easy go-to answer. And not because Tyler Buchner's not a great player and I'm not excited to see what he can do. I am, just like I am with Drew Pine. I even thought about Andrew Kristofic, because I'm really looking for, is he going to be the next great tackle at Notre Dame? I always kind of like, okay, who's the next great tackle that they're going to have? Because they've had this tradition of producing great tackles. But when I really think about it, I say, Xavier Watts is the modern wide receiver. And Notre Dame hasn't used or had a lot of those modern wide receivers. And what I mean by that is a guy that's fast enough to stretch the field, that has the ball skills to win one-on-ones, that can make plays after the catch, that's strong enough to run the ball and block, and someone who's, knows how to get open. He can physically do it all. He's an instinctive football player. I've talked to several different people, offensively, defensively, about, who are some guys that really stood out to you. And he's always one of the first names to come up, or somebody will just start talking about him to me without me even asking.
Sure.
And so I'll be talking about this other receiver. Well, yeah, he was good, but man, Xavier Watts was so hard to guard whenever he was down on scout team. And he was kind of back and forth on scout team this year. Him and Jordan Johnson would rotate. They'd only keep one of them up at a time. So don't even get me started on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've heard from guys say, boy, this kid was hard to guard. Because he would, and it wasn't just because he was making plays after the catch. He was out playing corners and safeties for the ball down the field. He just was, the scout team quarterback's just throwing up, grenades, and he's going up and making plays. So, and there's an opening there at X. And Braden Lindsey's a guy that I think is a guy we could have gone with too. But even if Braden Lindsey's a starter, Braden Lindsey is not a 60 snap guy. You're going to have to play two guys. Now, the way the staff has operated in the past, it's probably going to be like Joe Wilkins or somebody, a veteran player. But if the staff is smart and they come into the modern era and they, number one, use a rotation, not just one guy dominates the snaps, use multiple players. I think Xavier Watts is a guy that X could play X, he could play Z, he could go into the backfield, carry the ball. He can do a lot of different things. And I think we could even see him on some special teams next year, covering kicks as well. Because he's that kind of athlete. Clark Lee begged him to come play defense for him when he was still a recruit. So, because he was an all-state safety as well. So he's the guy that I'm most looking forward to seeing next year. And it was not an easy decision because there's a lot of young players and a lot of returning players that I really would have liked to have seen.
All right. So those are our offensive awards for this year. The Irish Breakdown 2020 season-ending awards. That was fun, Brian. That was fun. I enjoyed that. I'm really looking forward to the defensive side of the ball because I think you and I are going to be even more on different pages.
I'm not sure about that. I'm really curious to see how that one's going to go because like, depending on, I'm trying to think because I think what would Vince do? Like, it's not going to sway who I'm going to pick, but more about thinking about the discussion we're going to have. Who's Vince going to go with here?
So I need to get you a bracelet, WWVD.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, though. Make sure there's no lightning striking me here. But I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah,
I have my picks down, and I'm really curious to see kind of what you're going to do. And we'll record that one tomorrow, so make sure you have your eyes and ears out for that. And then also, and Vince is going to tell you to make sure you're staying locked into irishbreakdown.com. But I have today, this would be Monday still, I have an article about Kerry Cooks and why I think adding him to the staff would be really smart. I have an article about how Marcus Freeman's #1 recruit needs to be Houston Griffith. And then I also have the first part of what's either going to be a 2 or 3 installment of a film room breaking down Marcus Freeman's defense. So today I look at all the different bases and fronts and different things that people look at because everybody's think 3-3-5. What does that mean? How's it going to fit with Notre Dame? And I dive into his philosophy and how, number one, a 3-3-5 can look at Notre Dame, but also how I don't think just because he ran a 3-3-5 at Cincinnati means he's going to run a 3-3-5 at Notre Dame. And here's the proof of it.
Sure.
So make sure you check that out too. But make sure you're staying locked into IrishBreakdown.com.
All right. You said all the good stuff. So for Bryan Driskell, I'm Vince DeDario. We will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.